Academica Media. Welcome to Teach the Way They Learn, expert insight on educating all students. And now your host, Liliana Salazar.
Welcome everyone. And what an amazing treat. We are actually here at the 2021 Florida Charter Schools Conference. We are live streaming. I am here with my amazing producer, Ross Ulysse. Ross, I love you. I've missed you. I know that he has been working very hard in Jefferson County. And so it is so nice to have Ross in front of me because we have been podcasting. Our last few sessions have been via Zoom. So we're actually feel like we're back in the studio, Ross, right? And that we are podcasting again. So I greatly appreciate it. While we are waiting for our first guest to come over, which is Idalia Suarez, which is one of our Academica principals, our Somerset principals in Homestead, Florida, I have a very special treat. I have my amazing daughter, Amanda Salazar, that is here. She is working in the conference at the Doral College booth. So she is working as, what is your title now in Doral College?
I am the testing and recruitment coordinator.
The testing and recruitment coordinator. But I know that many of you that follow my podcast know that I've mentioned her a lot, especially with her degree in neuroscience. And we know that neuroscience is such a fascinating field, an expanding and growing field, especially when it comes to education. So I asked her just to come in. She's like giving me all these crazy looks like, Mom, I can't believe you're making me do this. But I'm like, that's what moms do. Moms put children in very uncomfortable situations so that they can grow. And that is what I am doing today. So Amanda, I want just to say, I want to welcome you, and I want to welcome you to all of our listeners and introduce you and so on. So please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what you studied and where you studied, and talk to us just a little bit about neuroscience.
Absolutely. Okay. This is my first podcast.
I know.
So
I'm very impressed. Good for you.
Thank you. My name is Amanda Salazar. As you already know, I am the middle daughter of Liliana Salazar, the host of this podcast. I am 23 years old. I am the testing and recruitment coordinator for Doral College. I got my degree. I got a BS, a Bachelor's of Science in Neuroscience from Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee. My neuroscience research mainly revolves around science of drug addiction and different things like that, but I've definitely done a little bit regarding education, regarding developmental psychology, and the different ways that our children learn.
So I'm really glad that you mentioned the drug addiction component, because again, we know you've been a part of my youth mental health first aid classes.
Mm-hmm.
And algae, yes. Assess for risk of suicide or harm. Listen non-judgmentally. Give reassurance and information. Encourage appropriate professional help, and encourage self-help and other support strategies. That is the mental health first aid, right? And that's what I teach in all of my classes, right? And I know that you've been a part of that, and I know that you've heard one of the statistics that I say constantly is that suicide among youth is the number 2 killer in the United States. So we're thinking, when we say youth, we say children ages 12 through 17 are dying. They're killing themselves, and that is the number 2 death going on in youth. And so we know that a lot of times youth commit suicide because they are under some type of substance, right? And their thinking is not clearly. And because of that substance, they get addicted to that substance. And that addiction, just leads them to a whole bunch of horrific things start happening to their body, but certainly their cognitive thinking and how they need to start making really good choices, or the right choices, the life-saving choices. Because, when you are thinking about suicide, you're honestly not in the right, state of mind. We know that addiction could lead to that. Talk to me a little bit about the research that you did with addiction.
So a lot of the research that I did regarding addiction actually has to do a lot with personality changes that happen because of these addictions, and things that happen specifically in your frontal lobe, which is the lobe right where your forehead is. It is in charge of your personality and different types of reasoning and behavior. It is basically what makes you you. And we find that I do a lot of my preliminary research in mice subjects, obviously, because you don't do research on humans in that way. And we've found that in the frontal lobes of many mice kind of subjects that we have had that are addicted to these different kinds of substances, you notice drastic changes in their emotions and in their behaviors and in the way that they do things. You can tell that they no longer can be as rational. So we kind of move that to humans, and then we see that people under these kinds of substances, because of the fundamental changes that happen in their frontal lobe, they are more moody. They're more desire driven towards that one thing, which is a substance that they are addicted to.
So Amanda, that is first I'm just so proud of you. I mean, the fact that you just said all of that, it just goes along with my work. And Ross, I think that we need to bring her back and we need to do a
No.
whole episode just
No.
in Teach the Way They Learn on that, because Ross and I talk a lot about this. We talk a lot about mental health in my podcast. And something that's really important, what you mentioned, is how their moods and how they start changing. And as educators, we need to be looking for the signs and symptoms, those red flags. And that's what I teach all educators that I work with, because let's be honest here, a lot of students are with us more than 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
A lot of students
Often more than they are with their own parents.
Absolutely, right? I mean, I know Ross works at a school where we have morning care, right? That starts very early, 7 a.m., where we have after school, right? Where they pick them up like around 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, they have sports. So you're looking at a child that is out of school starting at 7 a.m., gets picked up at 6 p.m. The main people that are with that child all day are educators. And
Absolutely.
so therefore we need to make sure that we are identifying those signs and those symptoms so that we can look at those red flags and we can make sure that we get them the appropriate early intervention and the support and the help that they need.
Absolutely.
Because we do know that peer pressure does cause is a big influence and a factor in substance abuse. Just the fact of being a youth and wanting to try something, and then that can just spiral out of control.
Absolutely.
So
I've seen it a lot with vaping and the nicotine addiction that's been happening now, actually. A lot of students will try it out. A lot of our youth will try it out for fun, and then they suddenly realize that they're addicted.
Right. And vaping is very scary because I know that there's like different flavors and the way that it's being marketed and packaged is very alluring to youth.
Yes.
And again, and my understanding is that there is a stronger addictive component in vaping than there is in just regular smoking. Am I correct?
I believe so.
That's what I had heard as well. So I mean, I think that it's really important that we understand that how taking a substance or abusing of a substance can start leading to these changes, these absolute personality. And so when you were thinking about how the mice started changing in personality, give me examples of that.
So we would get them honestly hooked. We would get them addicted to certain substances, and you would just see personal changes. They became more skittish. They became more prone to violence, different things like that. They became
So when you say skittish, I would almost say that in a student, what we might see is that they become introverted or withdrawn.
Yes. So obviously, it's very hard to do a research study that will actually be able to move our research from mice into humans. But saying mice become more skittish, they become more defensive, different things like that, you can tell in those situations, and you can assume and correlate that kind of study into something that may happen with humans. You see in these frontal lobe changes, as I've said, they are biological. Like, it is something that's not a choice that the student has or that the youth has. It's something that is biological. So it's something that is fundamental change within their anatomy.
And that's scary.
Yeah.
Like what I'm processing what you're telling me, and that is absolutely, that's very scary, that biologically things are changing. And I think what's even more scary is that in a youth things are already changing
Things are
biologically,
already,
right?
yep.
So I mean,
Neural networks are coming together. Different kinds of connectivities are happening in your brain all the way up until you're 25 for many people. And that is like that's when you say, you know how the saying is that you don't really grow up until you're 24, 25. So
yeah, absolutely. I think another thing that I wanted to talk about is that the situation where you said that the mice started getting very violent. What does that mean, like aggressive and violent? Because when I think of that, I think of maybe students that start having behavioral issues.
yes. Again, it's very hard to correlate between mice and people
Correct.
because it's very
Yes.
different.
We need to make that very, very clear.
It's very different.
Yes.
It doesn't mean, even though mice are prone to violence, like if you put them in a cage with another mouse, they may be more likely to fight each other, different things like that when they're on these substances. It doesn't move over into humans as well because we don't know
Right.
any studies on like humans being able to be different like that.
Right.
But I would say yes, it definitely comes with behavioral issues because those neural components in your brain, what happens is that you're very hooked on the substance, and a lot of your reasoning goes towards less towards reason and a lot more towards how can I get this substance
Like
again?
feeding that addiction.
Yes, feeding the addiction. Exactly.
And then again, when you start thinking, when your life is just consumed with feeding that addiction, then like everything else just comes out. You don't think about anything else. You don't function. You don't focus on anything else. You're just, you're concentrating just on feeding that addiction.
Mm-hmm. And that changes the way that you interact with people. Obviously,
Yeah.
you become more sheltered. You become more dependent on whatever that addiction is, and then usually the people closest to us will notice those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
And very often that's educators, our teachers. Very often it's friends and colleagues in school, peers that notice that different changes have been happening.
So Amanda, and I'm going to ask Ross as well. I know that Ross doesn't have a mic in front of him, but he can come on over. But I think that what's really important is, as educators and as administrators that are listening to this, and parents that are listening to this as well, we really need to make a concerted effort to share with our youth the horrific consequences of substance abuse and substance
Absolutely.
addiction. And I think that sometimes it almost is cool, right? And I think it's made that way, like, oh well, it's cool, or I could easily get off of it. But I think that almost to the point that I don't want to scare youth, but I really want them to understand that this could ruin your life. Besides the fact that you might get in a situation where you might be thinking about suicide because again you start losing some rational thoughts and stuff like that. I do think that awareness and education on substance abuse is very important. I mean, you guys didn't graduate from high school not too long ago.
Yeah.
So do you feel that your high schools did enough on substance abuse education? Or do you think, and both of you went to a charter school, you went to a regular district school. Do you think that they did enough, or do you think that there needs to be more? Because obviously you both come from really good families. I'm gonna take the credit for Amanda, but I know Ross's family, and they come from really good families. So you had that going for you, right? But not all kids come from really good families. Do you think that the schools are dropping the ball? Do we need to push more of this information of the negative consequences of substance abuse? We'll start with Amanda, and then I'm gonna ask Ross to come over so he can
I honestly would say yes, just because from my memory, the only thing that I remember with substance abuse being taught the dangers of it was in elementary school with DARE.
with DARE.
If you remember
Wow, yes.
DARE.
And like say no to drugs. Do
Say
you
no
remember
to
that?
drugs and different things like
Red
that.
Ribbon Week.
Yes, but I honestly don't remember much in high school besides like just making sure you have a good group of friends and keeping a good head on your shoulders, different things like that. That from the school perspective, I feel like there wasn't much that was being told to us, especially the dangers, because as you said, the horrific dangers, not only with addiction and being addicted to different things like that, but the fact that it changes your brain chemistry.
Yeah,
And
that's really powerful.
and at such a young age where you are still maturing and all of the links in your neural network in your brain are still forming, if you miss those formative years because you are addicted to something and it changes your brain chemistry, those are years that you don't get back.
Wow.
So it's
That's-
definitely something that I don't think the extent of the danger of these different kinds of addictions is explained well enough. And obviously, you don't want to scare kids, but there's a point where you want to make them aware, you know?
Yes, yes. Thanks so much for sharing that. And what about you, Ross? I know that you're not at a mic, but we're gonna ask him to come over. He's gonna come on this side because he's gonna have to be over here. But we're gonna share a mic. What do you think, Mike? What do you think, Ross?
Well, when I was in school, substance abuse kind of touched on briefly, but not really as much, like you mentioned before, Red Ribbon Week and around just certain events and things like that. But I feel as if substance abuse needs to be touched on more. Like when we were younger, it wasn't that big of an issue, but now because of the new generation that's coming in, and then what these kids have access to now, like, more technology, access to all these things and things that what they see now that they deem that's okay.
Excellent point.
And what society deems okay, that's why these kids think that it's okay because they see things on TikTok and Instagram and other social media platforms, and they don't see the later effects of what substance abuse and what all the other things can cause to them and do the neurological damage, long-term damage. So yeah, it needs to be touched on more in schools.
Definitely.
Thank you so much. So educators, administrators, parents, you've heard it from two students that really recently graduated from high school. We need to make sure that we are making a bigger and a stronger concerted effort on just exposing our children to the harm of substance abuse, of addiction, and seeing if we can be that early intervention, that person that makes the difference in that child's life so that they don't get addicted to a substance. Amanda, thank you so very much. I'm having such a proud mom moment right now.
No problem, Mom. I am glad.
I'm literally having my face is about to burst, and then my adopted son Ross is also here. So it's just a phenomenal, proud moment. So thank you, Amanda, for coming on and talking to us. And I have my next guest that's coming on. But thank you so much for being here, and thank you for sharing your information, your wealth of knowledge on neuroscience. And Ross and I are going to bring you back, and we're going to dive deeper into neuroscience and the study that you conducted while you were an undergraduate student.
Absolutely, Mom.
Thank you so much. I love you a lot, honey.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.